He didn't come for absolution. He came to put down a secret that kept getting heavier, a number that won't change, a lie that already did, and the silence he chose to live with. This is the Confession Stories.
It's been 6 years since I opened that email. I still remember the noise of the rain that morning. Steady, indifferent, like a rhythm that didn't care what it drowned. I had parked my car outside the office, coffee cooling in the cup holder, fingers hesitating above the screen. Inside that message was a truth I had searched for, and a truth I was never ready to hold. But before that moment, there was a smaller one, barely noticeable, quiet as doubt always begins. My son was 7 then. He had a habit of squinting whenever he laughed, a gesture my mother used to say came from me. Except it didn't. I knew it didn't. That squint belonged to someone else, someone I couldn't name. It started as a thought that passed like a shadow. But once you've noticed a shadow, it follows you everywhere. At dinner, I'd catch myself comparing features. His nose, narrower, his hair a shade lighter, his left-handed grip when he drew little airplanes. My wife would smile across the table, ask me to pass the wine, and for a second, the world would look exactly as it should. Then the doubt would move again, like a small creature shifting under the floorboards. I wasn't an insecure man. I built a company from nothing. I negotiated with people twice my age when I was 27. I didn't lose sleep over rumors or speculation. But this quiet arithmetic of resemblance started to eat at the edges of every success I had. It felt absurd, almost petty, yet impossible to stop. When you live surrounded by comfort, you start to mistake it for safety. My wife, Claire, was the daughter of a man whose name opened doors. Boston loved that family, their charities, their photographs, their polished smiles. Our marriage, too, was something polished. The right house, the right events, the right amount of affection on display. Sometimes I wonder if I married the idea of permanence more than the person herself. The first time my mother mentioned it, I dismissed her. "He just takes after her side," I said. She smiled politely, but didn't argue. That smile, I later realized, was pity dressed as politeness. After she died, I found a photo in one of her drawers. My son's face circled in pencil, a note beneath. "Look closer." I never asked what she meant. I didn't need to. Every man believes he can handle the truth until the truth is within reach. That's what I told myself the night I ordered the DNA kit. It arrived in a plain brown envelope, unremarkable, almost innocent. I waited until Claire and the boy were asleep. The house was silent except for the sound of the refrigerator cycling on and off. I remember standing in the hallway thinking, this is how betrayal must begin. Quietly, methodically, with sterile instruments. Collecting the samples felt absurdly easy. A few strands of hair, a cotton swab sealed in plastic. The act itself took less than 5 minutes, but it rearranged something fundamental inside me. By morning, I had mailed it to a lab under a false name. The confirmation email said results in 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours. That felt like a lifetime condensed into waiting. During those days, I noticed everything. Every word Claire said, every time she touched her phone, every laugh that seemed rehearsed. I told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia has a strange way of convincing you it's intuition. I smiled more, spoke softly, pretended harder. That was my defense mechanism, perfection as camouflage. The night before the results came, I couldn't sleep. I stood by my son's door listening to his breathing. He murmured something in his sleep, one of those half-formed dreams kids have, and reached out for a stuffed bear. I felt an ache that was neither love nor hate, but a terrifying mixture of both. I knew whatever the test revealed, nothing would ever be simple again. I didn't pray. I've never believed that prayer changes facts, but I did promise myself something. If the result proved I was wrong, if he was mine, I would love him harder, be grateful for the humility. If it proved otherwise, I told myself I'd face it like a man. Neither of those promises survived the email. The result arrived at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday. I wasn't ready, though I had checked my inbox 100 times. The subject line was clean, corporate, almost kind. Your paternity report is ready. I clicked. The page loaded, hesitated, then landed on a sentence that didn't raise its voice. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. No drama, no music, just the coffee machine humming behind me and rain tapping the window like it had somewhere else to be. I waited for denial, but denial didn't arrive. The truth arrived alone, unaccompanied, perfectly on time. I closed the browser and washed my hands. It felt mechanical. Hot water, soap, the strict geometry of motion. I dried my fingers slowly, as if leaving them wet would smudge the facts. Outside, Congress Street was a slick ribbon under a gray sky. I walked to the car and sat behind the wheel, palms resting at 10 and 2 like someone being examined. I didn't cry. I didn't even swear. I watched a delivery truck nose into the curb and a woman with a red umbrella cross against the light. The world was operating. I was the only broken appliance. I touched the leather of the steering wheel, then touched it again, as if the truth had texture and I could learn it by feel. Boston doesn't threaten you. It reminds you what it can do. My father-in-law never raised his voice. He didn't have to. I'd watched donors call in favors that looked like weather. A story like mine wouldn't explode. It would be managed, contained, until the parts of me that mattered in public were neatly removed. I wasn't afraid of scandal. I was afraid of process. I drove without choosing a direction. Boston knows how to pretend it's eternal. Brick on brick, history layered into a calm face. I passed the common, the library, the river wanting to be steel under the rain. If I had been the man I told myself I was, I would have pulled over and called Claire. I would have asked for an explanation and accepted the one she offered or refused it and let the world burn. Instead, I circled the city like a hand circling a wound. In the rearview mirror, I kept seeing the number 0.0, like a lighthouse that doesn't save anyone, only records what drowns. Buried in a shareholders' agreement I'd once bragged about negotiating was a clause I'd barely noticed. Conduct that causes reputational harm. Contesting paternity in a public way would qualify. Technically, quietly, fatally. It wouldn't just cost me a marriage. It could force a sale of my shares at a discount I had personally guaranteed. The bank wouldn't argue. Banks don't take sides, only collateral. By noon, I was at the office, performing competence. I answered emails with clean sentences. I signed a contract, shook a hand, commented on the weather with the right level of fatigue. I must have looked like a man holding it together. Only I knew what was crumbling. At 2 p.m., a junior associate asked if I had any thoughts on a client memo. I stared at the screen until the words returned to English. "Looks fine," I said, and the young man seemed relieved, as if I had blessed a ceremony neither of us believed in. When the elevator doors closed that evening, I watched my reflection in the metal and understood what masks are for. They are not for deceiving others. They are for not terrifying yourself. At home, the house offered its usual choreography. The quiet luxury of a kitchen that had been staged into existence. The soft-bellied couch that forgave how people sit when they are tired of being people. Claire was at the island with her tablet. She looked up and smiled the kind of smile that knows how it looks. "How was your day?" she asked. "Ordinary," I said. The word tasted both accurate and obscene. Our son ran in with a paper airplane and a request I would have granted on any day in any universe. "Can we test how far it goes from the stairs?" "After dinner," I said, because routines are also masks and children deserve to believe in them. There is a particular silence that comes only to people who have learned something irrevocable. It's not peace. It's not shock. It's a slow fog moving across a field, carrying the field with it. We ate. We talked about an assembly at school. We laughed at a video someone sent of a golden retriever misunderstanding a door. When he passed me the salt, his fingers brushed mine and withdrew with polite confidence. No flinch, no guilt. Innocence does not know it is innocent. I excused myself and went upstairs to the bathroom. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet and listened to the vents. The house breathed with me. "You knew this could be true," I told the man in the mirror. "You knew and you didn't want to know." The easy version of this story is rage, the clean narrative. I confronted her. I demanded names and dates. A scene happened. A moral clarified. That version doesn't belong to me. There was also the part I don't enjoy remembering. Years earlier, when we were trying for a child, a doctor used the phrase borderline motility and asked me not to panic. I did what men like me do. I worked longer hours and called it coping. It's remarkable how quickly self-doubt learns the language of mercy when it needs an excuse. What arrived instead was management, of tone, of posture, of consequences. I knew exactly who her father was and what a public man knows how to do with a private mess. I didn't fear scandal for its own sake. I feared the machinery built to handle it. I had done well inside that machinery. It could unmake me with the same steadiness. I was not thinking of money when I rinsed my glass and loaded the dishwasher. I was thinking of custody schedules printed on lawyer letterhead, of headlines that flatten people into sides, of a boy whose life would be revised by strangers. That night, as I read him a chapter from a book we both pretended not to be bored by, I noticed again the left-handed grip, the concentration that folded his face into a kind of solemn joy. He asked a question about a word he didn't recognize. I explained it. He nodded and looked proud of the new space in his mind. I thought, what if fatherhood is not a blood contract, but a practice, like reading? The daily decision to make something mean more than it did yesterday? It was a noble thought, and I resented it for arriving right then, wearing its good intentions like a tuxedo at a fire. Sleep didn't come. At 3 a.m., I opened the report again on my phone, as if the number might have learned manners and changed. There was a link to frequently asked questions. I clicked it and read about lab standards and error margins and statistical certainty. The careful grammar of science left no air for miracles. I considered a second test, then a third. Certainty is a staircase with no landing. It will take your legs and still ask for more. I closed the phone and listened to the refrigerator in the hall tick from cooling to idle. I tried to remember the last day before doubt. I couldn't. The past had been revised retroactively, and I was the editor who didn't sign his name. In the morning, a message lit her lock screen while she was in the shower. Call me if he says anything. No name. A number I didn't know. It wasn't proof of conspiracy. It was proof of preparation. She wasn't planning a fight. She was arranging a landing. When she came out in her robe, she met my eyes with that perfect public softness, the kind that lands not as love, but as calculation. When she asked everything okay, the question sounded less like care and more like risk assessment. Of course, I said, and realized that certainty is easy to pronounce and impossible to feel. The next day, I scheduled a second test under a different alias. It wasn't hope that drove me. It was procedure, the way suffering imitates professionalism. I told myself I would wait for that result before deciding who to become. In the meantime, I ironed a shirt, tied a tie, wrote to a client about projections for Q3. The tyranny of normalcy performed its duty. It kept me upright. At dinner, Claire described a fundraiser at the museum. She spoke in well-cut sentences that fit a life I recognized from glossy magazines. I watched her place her glass down in the exact circle her previous glass had left. A habit so practiced it felt choreographed. For the first time, I understood that she might fear me as much as I feared her. Not because of what I would do, but because of what I now knew. Knowledge is a border. Cross it and you change your citizenship. When I tucked him in, he asked if we could fly the paper airplane from the stairs tomorrow. Farther this time, he said, as if distance were a character we could invite to dinner. Farther? I promised. He fell asleep quickly, the way children do when they are certain the house will keep its shape. I stood there longer than necessary, inventorying the small room, the dinosaur lamp, the bent bookshelf, the poster of planets slightly misaligned, proof that a life was being built in increments. Down the hall, the report waited behind a password. In my chest, the number had no need of one. It had already moved in, rearranged furniture, labeled drawers. I turned off the light and closed the door. The hallway was a thin river of darkness. I walked it like a man learning how to move inside a new body. The second result arrived on a Monday at 6:12 p.m. as the city loosened its tie. A different lab, a different alias, the same sentence. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. Repetition has a way of polishing pain until it becomes an object you can place on a shelf. I placed it there. I named it fact. Then I made dinner. Silence isn't a single act. It's a discipline. I learned its mechanics. How to keep my voice even. How to file documents without leaving fingerprints on outcomes. How to sleep enough to function and not enough to dream. A man from the family office asked to meet for coffee. He'd known me long enough to skip pleasantries. He said words like stability, optics, best interests. He never said hush money and never needed to. He slid an envelope across the table. Draft NDAs, a co-parenting outline I hadn't asked for, and a line about no public statements adverse to family unity. I didn't sign. I also didn't walk away. I took the papers home and filed them in a drawer labeled house. I learned the geography of avoidance, the angles of hallways, the topics that don't lead anywhere dangerous, the speed at which a conversation can be redirected without feeling steered. I didn't become a saint. I became specific. Weeks turned into months that looked tidy from afar. There were report cards and client dinners, a museum fundraiser where I shook hands with men who had outlived the headlines that once tried to define them. Claire and I attended as if attending were the point. She wore a dress that caught the light the way a net catches a fish. On the drive home, she said we made a good team.
We make a good team.
We do, I answered, and we did, at appearing intact. I realized then that survival is just competence applied to the soul. I kept the reports in a password-protected folder inside another folder labeled with a name I would never click by accident. Some nights I opened them anyway, not to reread, but to confirm they still existed, to verify that I hadn't imagined the architecture of my life. Certainty, I discovered, doesn't soothe. It organizes, and organization was what I had left to offer myself. Spring arrived with its predictable optimism. We tested the paper airplane from the stairs. Farther, he said, and it was. He grew taller in increments my eyes could measure, but my heart refused to. His handwriting sharpened, then softened as speed overtook care. He learned the constellations and mispronounced Cassiopeia in a way I liked better than the real thing. On his 8th birthday, he asked if truth always wins. Eventually, I said, which is both a lie and a hope. He blew out the candles as if time were obedient. There were moments when I almost told him, not the details, just the philosophy, that love is sometimes a structure built to shelter something it can't claim, but children deserve the mercy of unambiguous nouns. So I remained dad in the present tense and let grammar do the work biology would not. If I have a virtue, it isn't courage, it's appetite for order. Call it cowardice if you like. You won't be entirely wrong. But tidy lives don't collapse on their own. Someone has to stop pulling. People speak about forgiveness as if it were a door you simply walk through. I never found the handle. What I found instead was adjacency, the ability to stand next to the life I had wanted and behave as if I were inside it. Some mornings adjacency hurt less than others. On the worst days, even my shadow felt incorrectly assigned. Therapy helped in the way a map helps a man who has chosen not to move. Claire remained composed, as if composition were the only promise she had ever made. We did not escalate. We curated. When politics touched our home, phone calls hushed, schedules rearranged, I recognized the choreography of discretion I had first admired in her father. I no longer imagined winning anything in a confrontation. The prize had changed shape. Peace measured in the small mercies of ordinary evenings. If that makes me a coward, I accept the title the way a museum accepts a difficult painting, on loan, under glass. One summer afternoon on the Cape, we stood at the edge of the water skipping stones. He tried to teach me a technique he had perfected without me. Wrist, not arm, he said and demonstrated. His stone danced 4 times before it surrendered. Mine sank immediately, loyal to gravity. He laughed the unembarrassed laugh of a child who assumes time owes him everything he asks. I loved him so completely in that moment that love felt like theft. I went inside and washed my face because sunlight and grief don't like to be seen together. Years became a container I kept filling. Sports practice, braces, the brief tyranny of algebra. A first crush I pretended not to notice. He called once at school pickup and said, "Can you come early? I got good news." I arrived to find him holding a certificate for something I would have dismissed when I was his age. "Proud of you," I said, and meant it in a way that surprised me. Pride, I learned, is not a genealogy. It's attendance. I attended. On the anniversary of the second report, I drove to the waterfront and sat with the engine off. The harbor moved with its usual authority. I considered telling Claire I knew, had known, would always know. I rehearsed sentences that were both precise and useless. In each version, the scene ended with lawyers, her side, then mine, then the side that doesn't take sides. In each version, a boy became a case. I started the car and drove home. Some betrayals require witnesses. Others survive on private oxygen. Mine breathes just fine. People will ask why I stayed. Because custody battles are factories. They turn children into product and parents into packaging. Because my company's covenants were written for storms like this. They'd pretend to be the umbrella while quietly cutting the handle. Because I loved a boy who slept better when the house believed itself. And because, if we're honest, I loved the quiet more than the principle I kept rehearsing in my head. This is not a redemption story. No one apologizes. No one is punished in a way that satisfies readers. The moral, if there is one, is administrative. I filed the truth where it would do the least public harm and the most private damage. I live with that choice the way people live with architecture they didn't design, by learning the light and moving the furniture. I have not forgiven Claire. I have not forgiven myself for preferring quiet to justice. I have not forgiven the part of me that uses the word justice as if I had ever been built for it. On school nights, I still read to him. He still asks for farther when we launch the paper airplane. We keep discovering that distance is cooperative if you treat it with respect. Sometimes, before turning off his lamp, I memorize his profile the way a traveler memorizes a map he'll never own. "Good night, Dad," he says, and the word lands where it has learned to land. Down the hall, behind a password I could enter blind, the reports wait like obedient ghosts. I don't need to open them anymore. The number isn't a screen name I can hide.
Good night, Dad.
It lives in my mouth when I say goodnight. And in my hands when I fold paper into a plane and aim for farther.
Dad?
Some truths destroy everything they touch. Some truths become the everything you touch. I will never unsee that number. And I will keep the silence that keeps the house standing.
Some truths destroy everything they touch, and some men choose to live with the ruin. If this story stayed with you, tell us what you would have done, or send your own confession anonymously. Subscribe for more true confessions, because the next story might be yours.